meeting today of the Georgia Commission on E-commerce and Freight Logistics. Nope, there we go. Nope. Echo. We've got our crack folks working on it.
The Georgia Commission on E-commerce and Freight Logistics.
Oh, we'll pause a moment.
Another pause. Okay. Folks working on it. The Georgia Commission on E-commerce and Freight Logistics. Oh, we'll pause a moment. Okay. Folks working on it. The Georgia Commission on E-commerce and Freight Logistics. Oh, we'll pause a moment. Okay.
Try it again. Try that.
How we now? Same. Yeah, he does.
Got your name.
We are better now? No.
Just turn that. So it's more than just that one.
Rick.
Ready? What? Did you do that? Yeah, give her a hand. Yay. Well, thank you. I sure appreciate our great folks in technology. We just want to welcome you here to our freight and logistics and e-commerce. I was driving in early this morning, Senator Gooch. It was dark, and I thought about you.
You did.
I did, Senator Gooch is visionary, and because, if you look on the news, if you watch the news, you listen to the Wall Street Journal, they're just talking about our subject matter.
Really?
And you really look forward ahead to know that this was something we need to be discussing, didn't you?
Yep.
And I just appreciate Senator Gooch's vision. And I'm teasing him because if you haven't looked at the Senate map, he's now my senator. Unless y'all changed it in the last few minutes. Well, you was like half my senator, but now you're all my senator. And we appreciate it. I look forward to working with you, Senator. But, enough of talking. We sure appreciate you taking time to be here. Our first speaker, you have something to say too, don't you, probably?
After that opening, I think we should move on. So
Okay. First speaker. You had met Mr. Bob Poole just a minute ago. He's got some great stuff to tell us. And Ms. Dodd, we should let you come up too, because you did the best introduction of this gentleman to me, and tell us why we should know him, why we should thank him, and maybe why we should listen carefully.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am Benita Dodd, Vice President of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. And when Bob called me to tell me that he was working on this study, I volunteered to pay him to let me participate in it. Many of you don't know Bob, but he's been working on transportation policy for decades. And as I said to Chairman Jaspers, Bob is the godfather of hot lanes, and I don't say that lightly. Bob came up with the concept, Bob came up with the name, and Bob came up with the reality that is now a part of our daily trip in Georgia. And he is a senior fellow with the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. He has spent decades on the Transportation Research Board, and his credentials are impeccable. And every time Bob comes into town, people look at him in astonishment at the ideas that he comes up with. And then decades later, we look back at it and Bob. So what about Bob? That. So thank you so much for having us. And thank you to Seth Milliken and Madison for arranging this.
We've had Bob with us for many years here in the Georgia General Assembly, dating back to 2015 when we had the Transportation Task Force looking at how to pay for all these roads and bridges that our commissioners are working so hard to make better. So thank you for being here today and being a part of this.
Thanks very much. How do I get the PowerPoint? Can you get it up? Okay, very good. Thanks. Okay, yes. Okay. Thanks very much for inviting me today. I've got a little frog in my throat, so apologize. This report that I think you all have a copy of is just being released. It's a joint effort of Reason Foundation, which is a national think tank, and the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, which is one of about 50 state-based think tanks. And it's actually, to repay the compliment to Benita, it's our favorite state think tank, and we've worked on a number of projects with them. Great, okay.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, I just use the arrow keys.
Yes.
Okay, so let's get right into it. There are a lot of challenges facing U.S. transportation, and I'm not going to talk about all of them today, but three specifically that are the subject discussed in this report. Number one is electric vehicle technology is coming fast. Much faster than most of us have realized. It's federal policy in a big way these days in the United States. It is worldwide policy. Every single automotive maker and truck maker are producing electric vehicles. Some of the big auto companies in Europe and the United States have pledged that they're going to stop producing internal combustion engines within the next decade or so. I'm not sure that's will actually happen, but that's definitely the plan that you're talking about. Fuel tax revenues have begun what is going to be a long, ongoing decline because of the change in fuel economy and the rise and growth of electric vehicles. Yet we're going to need to replace the fuel tax as the primary source of highway funding. The solution that most of us in transportation policy think is best, charging per mile instead of per gallon, has a lot of political difficulties in front of it. So we want to talk about that today, and the report discusses some ways about that. First of all, we should appreciate the fuel tax. It's over 100 years old, invented in Oregon in 1919. And within a decade, every other state had adopted one, and they were all dedicated to highways. I mean, we had hardly any paved roads in 1919, 1920. So the real message was we needed to get a lot of paved highways. Have the users pay for them seemed fair and equitable. And in those days, so basically all the Model Ts got about the same miles per gallon. So it didn't matter. Everybody was paying about the same. The first federal fuel tax didn't happen until the Depression, 1932, and it was not an earmarked tax for transportation or highways. It was a general revenue source to help the government pay for all the New Deal spending. It wasn't until 1956 that Congress enacted a dedicated fuel tax, the federal fuel tax, to build the interstate highway system, and created the Highway Trust Fund, originally to safeguard that money so it wouldn't be spent on anything else. Now, unfortunately, today, only about 70% of that money that comes from gasoline and diesel taxes actually goes to federal highway spending. But that's another story. But it's something that we could maybe try to do better when we replace the fuel tax. The revenue problem, number one is the corporate average fuel economy standards for new vehicles. The Trump administration partly rolled back the Obama administration ones that called for something 54 miles per gallon by 2025 for new vehicles. The Biden administration is in the process of restoring those, probably to the full strength. And those only went through 2025. But it's very likely that during the Biden administration, they will put together a framework for a decade or so beyond 2025. So you can expect even tougher miles per gallon standards for new vehicles after that. Now, today's new cars already, thanks to the previous set of federal mileage requirements, go twice as far on a gallon of gas. And we can see that be repeated probably in the next decade or so. And the last I knew, there were no official truck mile per gallon standards, but EPA is working on them, and I would predict that we will have them in this administration, at least in the regulatory review process. Here's the graph. Look at 1975 compared with 2020. You can see basically average miles driven per gallon. You go twice as far today, and 10 years from now, you'll probably go twice as far again. But even bigger problem is the growth of electric vehicles. This Congress is will enact some version of the proposals for big subsidy increases for buyers of electric, basically federal tax credits, including one for an additional one if it's made basically in Detroit by union labor, which the international auto companies are up in arms about and claim quite possibly it's a violation maybe of our World Trade Organization commitments anyway, and a big federal subsidy program for electric vehicle charging stations. The auto companies, as I said, are mostly making commitments to phase out internal combustion engine vehicles. And in a different research project that was just published by Reason Foundation, I worked with a traffic and revenue forecaster, and we projected that electric vehicles may constitute 50% of the U.S. light vehicle fleet by 2050, and that's a drastic change. That's not percentage of new vehicles. That's percentage in the total as the old vehicles get retired and replaced by electric vehicles. That's not guaranteed, but that is certainly a realistic possibility. And also the truck companies are all developing and have prototypes running on the roads today of electric trucks, including where we're getting to Class 8 trucks as well as smaller ones. This is a graph that my consultant friend Ed Regan from CDM Smith put together. The top line of that is a hypothetical imaginary case. If there were no change from today forward in vehicle fuel economy, then we'd have a steady increase. That's obviously not going to happen, but it's put there just for comparison's sake. The green line is the Energy Information Administration of the US government's projection, that what they call their reference case, which takes into account only the Trump administration's CAFE standards. So it understates what's going to happen once the Obama era standards get reinstated, and tougher ones after that. Then that's the orange line there. And then the bottom line is the projection based on Bloomberg New Energy Finance electric vehicle studies, looking at the changes in each year's electric vehicle sales and an assumption about the turnover of the auto fleet to the point where this is based on the fraction of the fleet of light vehicles. And this whole graph is for light vehicles only. It only deals with gasoline taxes. Diesel taxes won't be as affected as much or as soon, but something similar will happen eventually to diesel fuel sales, and therefore the taxes collected. So there's a lot of work that's gone on over the last 15 years on what we should do about this. I was on a TRB's Transportation Research Board special committee that worked in 2005, and the report came out in early 2006. We concluded that the fuel tax would not be viable long-term for the 21st century. Now, we didn't have any timetable in that, and we didn't make a specific recommendation for what should replace it, but we analyzed a lot of trends and said, this does not look like a sound bet to base our future funding on. Congress took a reaction in response to that, created NSTIFC, the longest name of a commission, the National Surface Transportation Infrastructure Financing Commission. And my boss at Reason Foundation, our vice president of policy, Adrian Moore, was a member of that. They spent about a year studying about 15 alternatives and weighed them all and finally concluded that charging per mile would be the most viable replacement. And one of the big advantages was that it would preserve the user's pay, user benefit principle that historically has been so important in fuel taxes. The year later, the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance was created to encourage research and demonstration projects. Today has 45 members, 12 state DOTs, not including Georgia or Florida, but 12 state DOTs, 10 technology companies, 7 trade associations, including AAA, and 6 research entities, including the Reason Foundation, are members of that group. Congress has been funding for more than a decade state pilot projects to test out this idea with real people in real vehicles. It's typically sponsored by a state DOT, and they invite volunteers to have some way of reporting their miles, and they usually give them several alternatives for 6 months to a year and collect data all the while. And several of these in more recent years have been multi-state. There's a big flurry on the West Coast, the Road User Charge West Coalition, and on this side of the country, the Eastern Transportation Coalition, formerly known as the I-95 Corridor Coalition. And it's very important for you all to know that the trucking industry was not in the very early pilots, but starting with the California Trucking Association about 6 or 7 years ago, and more recently with a number of trucking companies participating with the Eastern Transportation Coalition with a range of different size trucks. And a webinar that is still on the AMBUFA website that you may want to look at is called Trucks Are Not Big Cars, emphasizing how different trucks are from the standpoint of mileage-based user fees. Not that they shouldn't end up paying them, but that it's a much more complex situation than people's ordinary passenger cars. And there's institutions that like IFTA that have potential role to play that concerns only trucking. Now, sad to say, the general public is not on board with this idea yet. And this is partly due to media hype that has misrepresented what it is. One of the biggest worries is privacy and the idea that you would have Big Brother in your car tracking. They survey people use the word tracking, which creates this Big Brother fear, when the idea is not tracking. The idea is reporting miles driven. And that's not a privacy invasion per se. But anyway, double taxation, paying that I can't tell you how many conservative and populist friends I have who say, when I talk about this, you're fools to believe that this would not be just an add-on on top of the already awful gas taxes that we pay. So there's that kind of thing out there of people being really afraid that it's not going to replace, it's going to add on. Paying a lot more to drive. There are some environmental groups that don't like highway expansion that would like to have, if you're going to charge per mile, well, let's add on a noise charge. Let's add on an emissions charge. Let's add on all these things. I went to a TRB session one time where academics presented a paper in which the fraction of their proposed road user charge was about 10% of the total that they thought they would charge. This is their way. We're going to really kill these people driving around and polluting the air. So there's that kind of a thing out there. That's not a big part of it, but and here I say a cautionary note to state DOTs. Most of what they have discussed in public about this problem is there's not going to be enough revenue. And as soon as people hear that, they grab for their wallet, say, uh-oh. That's not the best thing to lead with. And our view is that you really should lead with the idea we need to make sure we can pay for continual improvement of our roads, particularly in states with growing population. The final thing that's a concern is that rural drivers will pay more because they travel longer distance to get places and so forth. Now, the good news is the pilot projects are addressing all of these concerns. First of all, the way they simulate charge, and I had one of these plug-in devices in my car for about 6 months, a couple of years ago. They showed me, based on the make and model of my car, its EPA combined miles per gallon rating, what I was paying in state fuel taxes for the driving I did during those 6 months, and what the hypothetical mileage-based charge would be. And they was within 1 or 2% of each other. It was to demonstrate people that it's intended to be a replacement, not an add-on, and that it's possible to design it that way. No, on average, everybody drives different amounts, so everybody's not going to pay the same thing. But that gets across to people in the pilot project. These all have choices of reporting mechanism, including in some states, no technology alternative, some way of reporting your annual odometer reading in a verifiable way. Or having an all-you-can-drive charge, figuring out, well, what does the average person drive per year? Okay, double that, and if you don't want to have any reporting or anything, you just pay the amount that equates to double that, and you can drive all you want. So there's choices being offered, and we're learning what people like and don't like. Private contractors are used in almost all of these to actually do the mileage collection from the vehicles and report the necessary summary totals to the state government. So this is to protect, again, put a buffer between the individual or the company and the government itself. There are strong privacy protections built into this, partly having the buffer between the driver and the government. Now, it turns out we have data now accumulating that rural drivers on average pay slightly less. And the reason they drive more miles, but they have gas guzzling vehicles mostly. On average, again, not everybody, but average rural person has an old pickup truck that goes a lot more gallons for the miles that they drive. And so with a flat mileage per mile charge, they end up paying slightly less, particularly in the Western states. The data were pretty good. And of course, trucking is more complicated than private cars. I mentioned that webinar that you might want to look at. The good news is the participants in the pilot projects, almost universally, large majorities that came in skeptical, come out saying, well, this looks like it's a workable idea. On the other hand, the vast majority of Americans have not participated in a pilot project. So they are still believing all the things that are having the fears that are common. So in this report and in other reports on the subject that Reason Foundation has published, we suggest change the focus to benefits of a better highway system on an ongoing sustainable basis, rather than focusing on revenue. And it's an opportunity also to address some shortcomings built into the way that fuel tax in today's context. First of all, it doesn't automatically keep pace with roadway needs. Your electric bill will go up periodically through an organized procedure if there's a need for more generating capacity, more transmission lines, putting lines underground. But a mechanism like this is political only, and there's incentives for elected officials to not raise gas taxes, and even those people concerned about transportation can make a good case for it. So this is a problem, and maybe we could produce something better with the mileage fee. The gasoline tax, fuel taxes in general, are not transparent. People have not the foggiest idea how much they're paying. Many people think it's a sales tax, that every time the price of gas goes up, what they're paying in gas taxes goes up. Not true in the vast majority of cases, but that's what they do. And they also don't know where the money goes and whose money pays for what roads. I think we could do a better job than that too if we need to redesign how we pay for highways. And it charges the same amount for dirt roads, neighborhood streets, and great big interstates. Now, what that does, we did a study about 15 years ago of California's highway funding system, and we found that it was grossly overcharging the people who drive on neighborhood streets and country lanes, and significantly undercharging the people who drive on the really costly to build and maintain interstates and freeways. And there's nothing that says that a mileage-based user fee would have to be the same for all types of roads. There's an opportunity, if we just choose that we wanted to do it, to make it more specific to what the actual cost of different kinds of roads are. Now, again, this is not necessarily what you'll do, but it's part of a vision of rethinking this. Our vision for what a better 21st century highway system should start with is rebuilding the interstates. Now, I'm sure Georgia DOT has been rebuilding some of the interstates. They're not all like I-40, no, I-70 in Missouri is still the original pavement, many overlays, but the subbase is still the one that was laid down in about 1959. And there's a lot of that. The Transportation Research Board, to bring it up again, was asked by Congress to take a detailed look at the future of the interstate system. And their report came out in December 2018 and in a more formal version early 2019. And it said much of the pavement after 60 years is wearing out and needs to be replaced, including the sub pavement in a lot of corridors. There are numerous bottleneck interchanges. The trucking industry very wisely puts out a bottleneck report I think every year or every other year. And almost all of them are the same bottlenecks. They maybe change their rankings, but they're all still there pretty much. We've built very few. There's not enough lanes for likely growth of vehicle miles traveled, especially trucks, which are projected to grow at a rate of about twice as fast as personal vehicles. And there's no planned truck-only lanes aside from GDOT's I-75 project. And so the bottom line, they estimated what it would cost to really do this in the United States. And they said, round numbers, $57 billion a year over the next 20 years. Works out to about $1 trillion, a big ticket item. Now, the very sad news is that with all this being the year of infrastructure in Washington, there's not a single thing devoted to starting the rebuilding of interstates in the infrastructure bill that the president is signing today. That's an egregious failure, but it's not his failure. It's a failure of Congress to take that big report from the TRB committee seriously. So our suggestion, GPPF and Reason Foundation, is to start the transition to per mile charging with a big project state by state to rebuild the interstates. A lot of the general public mostly thinks that the interstates, because the federal government commissioned it, owns them. Not true. Georgia owns the Georgia interstates. Florida owns Florida's interstates. It's a state's responsibility. And if a state doesn't take the bull, if Congress is not going to do this, if they're not doing it, if you don't, and other states do, they're going to have a better roadway system than you have. And it's as plain and simple as that. So the idea of switching to a per mile charge for the interstates only, interstates maybe and other limited access freeways, you would then have a revenue stream that could use for revenue bonds in a similar way that toll roads are financed. And to make this fair as a replacement, you do provide rebates of state fuel taxes for the miles driven on each corridor that gets converted and rebuilt to the per mile charges. Now that's a whole lot piled into one thing. And I'm sure there'll be questions, which I'll be happy to address. But the idea is to demonstrate to people when in the first case of putting in a per mile charge, that it really is a replacement and not an add-on. And so while the fuel tax is still in place for all the rest of the roads, it's unfair to keep charging it for the people the identified people with peach passes and so forth, who you know who they are, who are paying those per mile charges, and not give them a refund on the gas taxes for those miles that they drove. And also, this ultimately, Georgia will need to convert all roads, or maybe unless you leave local roads to be exclusively property tax. But all roads, not just the interstates, are going to need to go eventually to a per mile charge. But starting with the limited access system, where we already have a proven payment methodology, we know how to do bonding and so forth, would give breathing room for all the other roads that are responsibility of Georgia DOT. The gas tax, while it's still there, could be used for those. It doesn't have to take the burden of funding and financing the reconstruction of the interstates. And it would convert between a quarter and a third of all Georgia vehicle miles of travel, as this chart in the study shows. According to these are 2019 figures from the Federal Highway Statistics table VM2 of the breakdown by type of roadway. 28.2% was on limited access highways. And so that's a nice chunk to start off the conversion if would be the political will to do that. Longer term, all the other roads would probably have to be converted. But as I said, you get breathing room for a number of years while the first big corridors are being converted. Also, by using an existing technology like Peach Pass for an easy pass for interstate use, you don't have to make a decision on what technology for all the other roads where you can't have gantries every few miles and so forth. You can wait for better technologies to be developed, for the privacy concerns to be eliminated, and where the already economies of scale, because other states are doing this on a larger scale, so the collection costs will be lower. So, and my visionary long-term goal, which may never happen, is that people would get a highway utility bill eventually, itemizing what they pay for each category of roads. And there we gave a little hypothetical example, just all made up numbers, but sort of like your property tax bill, but it could come monthly for ease of payment. The county, county road might be the agency responsible for the roads that are not Georgia DOT's responsibility. Georgia DOT highways other than limited access, and then the limited access providers, which could be private concession companies like on the 285 project. It could be CERTA itself as a statewide toll agency and so forth. So that's a vision which you don't have to accept this to accept the need to make the transition and maybe to start it with the interstates. So now the last bit is what should the next steps be if you are at least convinced that you need to start thinking about the transition. First thing would be Georgia has been not an active participant in any of the multi-state pilot projects or a state-specific project. There's money available every year for the next, I think, 3 or 4 years from Congress for pilot projects. And the Eastern Transportation Coalition is continuing multi-state projects that include trucks. So this is a great opportunity that Georgia has been conspicuously absent from. Second, I think we recommend GDOT should inventory the entire Georgia limited access highway system taking a long-term look. Which corridors need to be fully reconstructed? Which ones need widening and how much? When the reconstruction should ideally take place? When widening should take place? Which interchanges will still need to be, that aren't in the current plans, should be replaced and when? And then a long-term master plan with cost estimates and sort of some financing ideas for these projects. That would at least give you, say, what is this hypothetical better highway system that you're going to promise by converting to a better sustainable payment system? So that's the recommendations. And I'm sorry to throw so much at you all at once, but you have the report and I'm available now and also available certainly for follow-up questions by email and would be happy to engage any of you on that. Thank you very much.
Bob, thank you for that. You did go through that very fast, and I know there's going to be a lot of questions, and I'll have a few, but I'll let Chairman Ginn start us out. Mr. Ginn, you have a question for Bob?
Thank you, Chairman Gooch. Said everybody wants to know about Bob, but one of the things for me, I think most Americans that have to pay income tax said despise income tax because of all the record keeping that you have to do. And when I look at what you're proposing here, I'm thinking about what a royal pain. So for me, I don't think it gets much simpler than right now. We collect from distributors on gas tax. It's you're paying it at the pump. You're going to have to come up with something to keep it simple. Said and so for me, I'm not sure that the vehicle miles traveled and the accounting and all of the things that are going on here are going to fly in my neighborhood for my folks. I want to make it where, we've got to come up with a way to fund our transportation needs, but also to make sure that we're not spending a dollar to chase a dime.
No, absolutely. I mean, I agree that we do not have the cost problem solved yet. I mean, we do know that for the limited access highways, a tolling system or charging system that makes it very advantageous for people to have prepaid transponder accounts.
We live in a free country. So when I go around the loop around Athens in my district, I'm on a camera from one start of that point till the end of it. I despise the fact that everywhere you go, there's a camera. I mean, it's a transponder. So there's one in front of us. And to me, this is where everything that is in the transportation world, I just don't want to go that route.
I don't like the idea of cameras either, but personally, believe me,
Chairman Gainer, you have
grates on me as well.
Just
But
trying to make a point.
we do not have, let me just finish the point I was going to make. We have evidence that we can get the cost of collection with a transponder-based system that has prepaid accounts down to about 5% of the revenue collected. Now, that's not as good as the 1 to 2% with the gas tax. It's true, but that's a big improvement over the 20 to 30% that used to be the case with cash tolling in the last century. On the question of all the other roads, we do not have a cost that is acceptable in any of the pilot program because they're dealing with a few thousand people. So the cost of the administration and the technology, there's no economies of scale in that whatsoever. On a statewide or national scale, there's the potential, but we don't have this worked out yet. And that's why I'm saying it's premature to try to start converting all the roads in Georgia to this. But it's not premature because we have the technology to do limited access highways that way.
I'm going to ask a question to put her on the spot. Ms. Dodd, do you endorse this proposal, your organization? Have you support the VMT model?
We support looking at it, yes, as an alternative to a declining fuel tax base.
Okay, well, good, thank you. Because I think your position's changed from back in 2015. We had this discussion. Your predecessor, at least, I don't think supported the VMT model, if I'm not mistaken. But I was just curious. My question is, and it's somewhat of a comment too, 5 years ago when we passed the transformation tax, got rid of the sales tax you talked about. We went to a straight excise tax. We also addressed the electric vehicles at the time. We had just started seeing the electric vehicles. We had a very lucrative tax credit here in Georgia. We repealed it. We took a shot at what is a fair number for an electric car to use of Georgia roads. And we came up with, was it $300 a year, $200? And so we were thinking then that was the Nissan Leafs and the Teslas, small compact cars. Just last week, I had a meeting in my office with a company that has an interest in selling bigger vehicles that would replace gasoline engines, whether they're brown trucks or the FedEx trucks or what have you, the vans. And they're looking to order 10,000 of these things immediately.
It's really
so we have an immediate need to, I think, look at our state policy going forward, but beginning literally in 2022. What is that number? $200 a year is not going to touch it compared to what they're paying in gas tax or diesel fuel tax. So
no, I think you're right.
That's that transition. And my thought is, if this truly is going to be the wave of the future, we're going to get rid of the combustible engine. maybe it's going to be longer than 20 years. In some parts of the state, it may not ever happen, but why not continue collecting the gas tax on those cars and trucks that'll continue to use gasoline? But go ahead and put in a policy today for the future before we have 1 million electric vehicles running up and down the road. Politically, it'd be a lot easier to do it today. And if you have to do it on a VMT, only do that on the electric cars. But my question is, logistically, how do you measure that VMT? Do you do it through the car's electronic capabilities? Like my truck today, I get an email from General Motors that says you're due for an oil change.
Right.
And you're
right.
at 72,000 miles on
Yeah,
your car. So they already know how many miles we've driven.
We refer that to as vehicle telematics. And yeah, that is one possible way in which this would be done. It's likely that all cars are going to have that, and probably and trucks as well, within the next decade, I would say. A great many do today.
So the total electric cars and trucks that are being put on the roads, do they have that technology already built into them, you think?
I have not researched that question, but I suspect so. I know, well, Tesla certainly knows everything that goes on with their cars.
Right. But to me, it would be easier just to have one price per mile, and not whether it's on a local road or a state route or an interstate route. I think that gets complicated unless you're going to have a system in place like Frank was talking about, where there's cameras everywhere and sensors everywhere, but just seems like a huge infrastructure to build.
Right. I don't want a future like that either, frankly.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you. Senator Anavatarde, do you have a question? Did I talk too long?
You actually asked my question.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Who else? Chairman Jaspers.
Thank you, Bob. This mine is on this, as Senator Gooch was talking about also. On the pilot project you did it, my just questions are how big was it? Where was it at? I mean, I think those are kind of follows along with this as the acceptance of people. You know, as Chairman Ginn said, they would like that Jasper either, but but it depends on where it was at. I'm just curious.
Well, pilot projects have at individual states in California, Oregon, Washington, Minnesota, Utah, Virginia. Virginia participated in the Eastern Transportation Coalition multi-state project, and Pennsylvania has been part of that. Maryland, Delaware. I don't think any of the North Carolina may have participated in that one. Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance I think has profiles of all of the state pilot projects. So the MBUFA website would be a good place to get the details. Also, I think Federal Highway Administration, which is the agency that gives the grants for the pilots, I'm sure must have a report on each one. Of lessons, what they did, who did what, and what are the lessons learned from each one.
Well, I guess I'm just curious what Senator Gooch asked. Would they have it just on the electric vehicles? Would there be a segment you could look at to see their acceptance of something?
Well,
Not
I believe the Utah has gone beyond its pilot projects and now put in a opt-in program on an ongoing basis, and electric vehicles I think it's offered. I'm not sure if they're required to be in it, but their main idea is to get electric vehicles into it and pay per mile rather than a flat annual fee. But other people with cars that have within a certain miles per gallon range are also invited to participate in the Utah ongoing program. And Oregon has an ongoing program along similar lines that started a few years before Utah. Utah's just started, I think, last year, and Oregon's is about 3 years old now. And so it's ongoing, and they're going to gradually expand the categories of vehicles that are eligible to be in it. You still have an option in Oregon to drive your gas car and pay the gas tax. They didn't abolish the gas tax.
Did Utah have a broad fee like we have now for electric vehicles, and then it was voluntarily you could go into something like this?
Into the mileage-based one
you had
instead.
A choice?
Yes, it's a choice. I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did they separate the city streets from the state routes? Because I know the local governments are here today. They're going to want their share of that.
Right there. I don't know how they're charging for all miles driven.
Yeah.
And so how they sort out where the money goes, I don't know the answer to that.
So the locals in Georgia, they get a sales tax off the pumps. We didn't touch that portion of it.
Right, right.
In our bill.
So, I mean,
Years ago.
eventually, if you go to a system where all vehicles pay per mile basis, then obviously has to be a way to get a fraction of the total to the local governments. Yes, yeah.
Gotcha. There's a button on your mic at the bottom. If you want to ask a question, Trey and Russell, aren't legislators, so but I just wanted to make you aware of that. Commissioner,
thank you. Thank you very much. And this is more of a commentary. One, I want to thank Bob and Benita that, listen, this is somebody we trust and take a lot of stock in Bob's work over the years. I'm well read. I read everything he puts out. So it's good to see you and thank you for being here. Just a couple things. It sort of gets to recommendations. Is one, I signed a letter about a month ago, last month, for the Eastern Transportation Coalition to join into their mileage-based user fee program that has been ongoing. North Carolina did join. They're the furthest of the states that go all the way to Florida, basically the Eastern Seaboard. The states in the Northeast started the first pilot, and we've tracked that pretty closely. You get a lot of the smaller states in the Northeast that interstate travel happens on a daily basis, and that's one of the complexities that has to be solved, as well as if you leave one state to another. One great thing about Georgia being the largest landmass east of the Mississippi is if you're going north to south, you're probably going to stop and buy gas in Georgia, generally. And so that's a good thing. And but how do you reconcile that, not only among states, cities, and counties, but among interstate commerce or travel for non-commercial vehicles? Commercial vehicles, as Bob mentioned, through IFTAs may be a little easier to reconcile. It's certainly been a positive out of the Eastern Transportation Coalition's work up in the Northeast, because it's a lot easier. They have to reconcile that anyway. So that becomes a lot cleaner for them. The other thing was part of the recommendation was looking at the interstates. And I want to assure you that Janine Miller and the planning staff is, through our freight and logistics plan that's required to be done nationally by the end of next year, is a focus on, I think we're calling it Interstate 3.0 now. Certainly builds upon the work that TRB had done. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that that report did not get the emphasis that it needed, just to foundationally take care of the nation's interstate needs. So we have that focus as well. It sort of shows back why you need to invest, not you just need more money. So there certainly is a need here in Georgia. One of the things, I guess, just a commentary, a little bit of the takeaway in the early pilot, the first pilot by the Eastern Transportation Coalition, was what was addressed, and Bob addressed too, was the back office, was the handling. Mm-hmm. Extremely expensive. That's every vehicle. I believe Georgia has 10.5 million registered vehicles, something like that. So there's a lot of back office that comes about, but with technology, maybe it gets better and better. You're being tracked anyway. People just don't think about it, but they are. So I think with technology comes along, there has not been a real nuanced difference between mileage-based user fee and EVs, though. And I'm close friends to the Utah DOT director. I'll reach out to him about the EV. He had the module in his vehicle, and what he found out was that he may have gone around curves a little too fast. So it has some other telematic data and the like that gets uploaded. But also through a partnership with the Eastern Transportation Coalition, we're working with some companies to extract telematic data, not for miles traveled, but sort of anonymized. So where Frank left, we're not tracking Frank except in Athens and Madison County. But for hurricane evacuations, we're trying to understand how we can deploy and route people strategically using that telematic data of where people may be, where cars are. and so that we can route them and leave some bottlenecks when everybody likes to leave Florida at the same time. So, but there's a lot of data there that hopefully we learn some things from as well. It's been hard. I'll say that it's not easy right now, but it's been hard. And then the final thought is as we think about CAFE standards improving, and then EV, which is Bob's right, is happening. This is happening. President signing the IJA today. It has provision. I mean, it has a big emphasis of EV, and we're going to capitalize on that in Georgia. It also furthers the national study on mileage-based user fees inside of the IIJA for that pilot to continue. So it's a lot there, but I would suggest too that in CAFE improvements that hybrid, gas electric, diesel electric may have more of a erosion of motor fuel consumption than straight to EV. Because those technologies get better and better, especially in the commercial sector. Even though Bob's right, every freight company is working on a electric truck of some sort. And as you mentioned, especially in the lighter, delivery type trucks. So this is timely. This is a great report. Well done. I certainly appreciate it, and we'll certainly continue to work through some of those recommendations, and glad to work with this commission as such. That was the last of my question.
Thank you. Commissioner, can I ask you a question on the other states? Do any of them have numbers yet, what they're proposing for a VMT for a heavy truck? Let's say a 80,000 pound gross weight truck, electric. It's not there completely, but it's coming. So what would that VMT look like?
Well, so two things is generally the effort has been a collection methodology. How does the collection work? Not so much focused on the rate. If there was a rate involved, when there's actually a rate involved, it's always been the equivalent. So of trying to get to the equivalent of what the MPG fill up at the tank gallons consumed would be. There's always two policy issues there of how do you collect it, and then what it is, what's the rate, and if there's to the point here, if there's build better roads, what does that cost, and then you have to tag the equivalent rate to that mileage-based user fee. Those are a little bit distinct policy discussions, and everything right now is really how do you operationalize this to make it work, and you make the back office side of that efficiency, getting the efficiency there instead of being a big collection agency, or however you figure out how to reconcile that.
My other question on that is, my fear is the federal government's going to try to figure out how to get their fingers into this revenue. Are they talking about a VMT for the federal side, or is it just state dominated?
Yes, the federal Congress, the bill the president is signing today includes a federal pilot project, which
I would oppose that.
Yeah, but it's in the bill, unfortunately.
Well, remember, there is a federal excise for gas and diesel now.
I oppose it too. But
okay. All right. Well, fair enough.
I want all the money to stay here. I mean, you and I have talked about this for years. But
no,
I'm just afraid that the inefficiencies of the federal government will continue to worsen, regardless of who's in charge. I'm not talking about Democrats or Republicans, but both. We've seen how much more it costs to build a road using federal money.
You're preaching to the choir,
right,
sir.
So
yes.
If we can figure out a way to steer that money to the states alone, we can put it to use a lot quicker and more efficiently. You agree?
I agree. Yes.
Thank you. State Representative Perkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for this. Mr. Bob, there's some mighty cool things floating around in your noggin. And I've been trying to write all these things down. I have the questions that were asked and some not answered and some went over. As a general rule, because I don't like change per se. I'm not a big fan of that mileage-based user fee. I think right now it kind of works its way out. I'm going to pay more for my F-250, or actually I drive a Chevrolet, the 2500. It cost me $100. You're very welcome, Commissioner, every time I come to Atlanta in it. And so we're going to pay more. I pay more for using that big truck when I come back and forth
Yep.
to the Capitol. But I'm a big proponent of pay as you go.
Mhm.
How about pay for the service that you use? So if I'm using our state parks, I should be one of the ones that help pay for those things. And so I think a lot of us can agree on those type things. One of the questions I had, and that was a long way to lead into, are we looking at this mileage-based user fee? Mainly because of the prevalence of the EV vehicles coming up, or is it because the cafe standards? I mean, did it show the recommendation was like twice what they are in 5 years or something? Is that what it was?
Well, I think if you look at the graph in there about fuel sales, the thing that makes the most difference is the growing penetration of electric vehicles. Near term, it's going to be the increased CAFE standards, but over the next 20 years, it's going to definitely be the electric vehicles, according to the most reasonable projections that are out there now, and the plans announced by major auto companies, both of the domestic companies and the major imports, are all committing to electric vehicles replacing petroleum-powered vehicles.
Can I have a follow-up, Mr. Chairman? So most electric vehicles right now are these little bitty old things that, and there again, pay as you go, not exceedingly difficult on our roads and bridges. And the question had been asked, and I don't know that's been answered, or maybe I wasn't paying attention. The current one size fits all fee that we currently have on electric vehicles, if they are these little bitty, run around town type things, are they basically equivalent in terms of the fees that would be collected on a regular size car for the same type of purpose?
Well, that is a good question, because a flat fee for all electric cars, whether they're little or big, is not the same as a little or big gasoline powered car. So there's a fundamental difference there. And if you want to maintain the same proportion of user pay, the fee should be larger for the bigger car. On the other hand, I mean, I'm an engineer, and I've studied the data on the stresses imposed on highways and bridges by axle weight, and the difference between a small and large personal car makes really no difference in significant pavement wear or bridge stress. It's only when you get very high axle loadings that makes a meaningful difference in how fast the roads wear out and so forth.
One last.
Hit it. Go ahead.
I brought it up because you'd mentioned, perhaps one of the things we could do is, hey, let's figure out what the average miles driven would be. Let's double it. And you pay this thing, and you don't have to worry about filling out the papers and worry about Big Brother checking on you and this and that. Is that something that we're kind of doing already with our EV flat fee?
In a way, yes, because so it's not fair in the same pay as you go sense that a gas tax has been historically. Yes, you're right.
I think our discussion 5 years ago was, do we want to do a VMT or do we want to just do an annual fee? And we all finally agreed that trying to get into the person's personal life was not politically doable. We had opposition to that from a lot of interest groups. So we settled for the $200 based on, I think it was 12,000 miles of travel, on what that average, MPG would have been under gas tax, what have you. So
I'm not a Georgia resident, so but my off the top of the head statement is that probably was the right decision at the time. When electric vehicles are the majority of the personal vehicle fleet, I'm not sure that's the right answer then.
We'd love to have you though.
But if we start doing this on commercial fleets, we know that $200 is low based on
Probably.
80,000-pound truck or dump truck's going to do. So we
80,000,
have to
yeah,
figure out a
yeah.
way to
Right.
do it's an
Well,
analysis.
I've done a lot of work on just as a matter of comparison on toll roads and the average per mile toll for a Class 8 truck is about 4 times the average per mile toll paid by a passenger car.
Right.
So there's a data point that doesn't say anything about what should happen, but that's a data point that's out there.
Gotcha. Thank you. Dr. Rett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I was in the Air Force, I was stationed in Italy, and they told me all roads led to Rome, but apparently they've never been to Atlanta or Savannah. But just a small question. I noticed where you invested in rail to support places like the Port of Savannah.
Mhm.
Any thoughts about separate lanes in certain areas for trucks?
I'm on record for many years advocating dedicated truck lanes. I think particularly as we get to vehicle automation and platoons of automated trucks, average motorist is not going to want to be facing a 4-truck platoon as a moving wall. And I think and also if something happens, if there's a glitch in the automation, I think motorists are not going to want to be in adjacent lane with no barrier in between. So I think the case for dedicated truck lanes is growing stronger over time, particularly as truck automation becomes a reality.
Let's see, Mr. Googe, did you have your button on? Number 10. All right, you're on.
There's a problem if there's solutions.
Right.
Solutions are probably more complicated, but I want to try to summarize the problem as I've heard
Okay.
stated is a first step. And contributing factors, you talk about electric vehicles, the commissioner pointed out it's not just electric vehicles, but hybrid vehicles, which typically get better fuel economy, CAFE standards, and a general political push that is probably going to be with us for a while against hydrocarbons. So there's a lot of contributors, but the core truth is that there's going to be a significant, we're already seeing, and there's going to be an accelerating divergence between vehicle miles traveled and gallons of gasoline.
Right. Yes.
So that would be sort of no dispute that that's our fundamental kind of funding structure has always relied upon those two being highly correlated.
Yes.
That correlation is going to break that. So is that a fair?
That's a fair assessment of what the problem is that we're all facing. Yeah.
Second question. History seems to be moving a little quicker every year. If we were to look back in time just a little while, say 2015, is it fair to say that this trend has accelerated dramatically in the past 3, 4, 5 years?
Yes, I think that is correct. It would have been faster if the Trump administration hadn't softened the CAFE standards, but
they provided a speed bump.
yeah, on an ongoing trend. That's quite evident. Yes.
And maybe this may be a little bit out of your area, but sort of politics aside, there are a lot of energy, no pun intended, behind limiting hydrocarbon usage from factors.
Yes,
other
sure,
than
sure.
Democrats and Republicans, but ESG pressure and
Sure.
community. So this would be likely, this trend would be likely to continue absent.
Absent the Biden administration.
Right.
Yes, I agree.
Because it's core to, at this point, it's core to the strategy of all major vehicle manufacturers. And maybe even some hydrocarbon.
We're going to have to move on in just a second, but Senator again had a pretty good comment. But how do you deal with the out-of-state EVTs? If you're
Everybody in America drove electric vehicles except for Georgians.
All right.
So 100% of the rest of the country's electric vehicles, we never collect a dime I'm looking at it and thinking, How do you do that?
Well, I don't, I
Based
think,
on our model of $200.
yeah, yeah. Well, say again the scenario you're asking about.
So you gotta, everybody else in America
Is-
has electric vehicles, 100%,
Okay.
trucks, trailers, everything.
Why wouldn't Georgia?
I'm just,
okay.
you know,
Well.
in your engineering stuff, they take things to extreme to figure it out.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm saying everybody else in America is driving electric vehicles, but we're not.
Yeah, okay.
If that were to happen, the flat rate that we charge per electric vehicle, we wouldn't collect a dime. Said they, but what, yet we'd have all these electric vehicles on our roads. You know, right now with the motor fuel tax, they drive through Georgia as a car, personal
sure.
car, whatever. They're usually going to fill up with gas, something like that. Here, one of the problems is that how do you handle that? You know, if you do a flat charge on
It's a very good question. I don't have an answer for that. That would be a real dilemma. Fortunately, I think that's not a very realistic scenario.
Senator, again, that'll be your assignment for our next meeting. Come up with a proposal. Senator Anna Vitarde, you have the last question if you want to.
Yeah, and I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I can talk offline after we get done with the meeting. My discussion or question I want to ask you is, how do you take this policy discussion in light of the current world we're in terms of supply chain issues and everything going forward in terms of cost to business, cost to move product, and how that all kind of wraps up into, I think, what you're proposing today, but we can talk about that offline.
Here all afternoon.
Right. And I actually have a plane to catch.
This has been a very good conversation. And
Thank you, sir. I've enjoyed very much being here, and I thank you for your attention.
We
and for
appreciate you
good
coming
questions.
over.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Next up is our very own Josh Waller from the Department of Transportation.
Chairman
Do you have a
Gooch.
DOT PowerPoint to
I
present?
do. Let's see. I know. I need all the help I can get. Well,
We are a little bit behind schedule, but that was a good conversation.
I'll try and do my best to help us recover some schedule. So we do at Georgia DOT.
On time and under budget.
Is this looking familiar?
Yes, that's
Okay.
awesome. Thank you very much. Chairman Jaspers, Chairman Gooch, members of the commission. And my boss is Commissioner McMurray, so I can't leave the boss out. But thank you for the opportunity today to present on the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA for short. There's a good chance that over the course of these remarks, it's being signed into law right now. The event will start at 3:00. So what I'm going to do is give a little bit of an overview of the bill, and then focus in on kind of the freight and logistics components, particularly around funding opportunities. I think one of the key things we're going to see in the coming days, and we've seen the run up to, is obviously looking at that top line number of 1.2 trillion, but kind of breaking that down and having an understanding of what does that mean? How does that translate for Georgia? Top line numbers, and a big focus on the fact that a lot of the additional funding comes in the form of competitive grants, competitive programs that are administered by that will be administered by US DOT, for which we're going to wait and have to see what the guidance looks like. I think one of the key takeaways to make sure that we look at is, it's great we've got additional funds, but federal funds have requirements to be matched. And so the matching components are going to be critical, not just for the guaranteed funds, but also if we think about Georgia being competitive and trying to seek some of those competitive funds, we have to ensure that we'll have the funds necessary to match those federal funds. I'm just going to click through all the fun little graphics here. Just to illustrate the point, to illustrate what this slide was, we had this $1.2 trillion bill that's actually a good component of it coincided with the reauthorization of the Federal Transportation Program, which occurs every 5 to 6 years, depending on the bills. And so a good chunk of this is just reauthorizing those baseline funds that states have been getting through formula, as well as some of the existing competitive programs. And we'll talk a little bit, though, about those areas where those dollars were plussed up. But just to the next slide, we see 1.2 trillion, 567 billion of that 1.2 is what's going to USDOT. The other 633 billion is going to sort of non-transportation infrastructure. And this isn't exhaustive, but this is some of the components: power infrastructure, broadband, water infrastructure, not water infrastructure. Again, that's a typo there. But then on the USDOT side, about 308 billion of that 567 billion comes to the states as formula. And y'all should also have a printout too of this. That's the formula funds that go off a set formula based off of population, what's paid. It's a decades old formula that got tweaked, I think, the last time with Safety Lou. But those come to the states, guaranteed funding. Has to be matched, of course. Then about 43.6 billion in grant funds. And that's going to be one of those things we'll talk about the opportunities of making sure that Georgia's in a good position, not just state level, but local level, to pursue some of those grant opportunities. About 174 billion. So those are the federal highway funds, those first two bullets. The third one is the non-FHWA. So that's going to be your rail, your transit, FAA, and other funds. And I will note that, so we'll talk about transit federal funds. We'll talk about the transit formula funds that we get. On the rail side, we don't actually get formula funds for purposes of rail, like the freight rail, the short lines. While we get some money for safety oversight, that's one thing to keep in mind, is there's not a formula program. Most of those funds that we could get through the feds comes through the competitive side. So here's a look at the formula apportionment. So obviously today, theoretically, the president is either signed into law or about to sign into law the bill. FHWA has provided some initial estimates based off of their interpretation of the bill as to this sort of top line. You see apportionment. That's kind of thing that's the cap on the amount that Georgia will get. That's not necessarily going to be the dollar amount, because there's actually another level that's called obligation authority. So it's some amount that's going to be less than that, but that just gives you a good ballpark about. And also you can see from year to year that increase. So you're here, it has about a $300 million increase over from the fiscal year 21, which is the last year of the extended last year of the FAST Act, to the first year of what will be IIJA. It's a 21% increase. The bullet there obviously is all those funds will require at least a 20% match. So now when we think about that about 300 million. Yep.
Yeah, I'm seeing the detail now. So we're the actual GDOT budget. We recognize this current year 1.4 billion from federal funding.
1.4 billion was the apportionment level.
Mm-hmm.
It was a little bit different than that. And just one side note, when you're looking at the state budget,
mm-hmm.
you're not only authorizing us for the current year monies, but you're also authorizing us for some prior year federal monies too. So that number, when you go and pull the budget book, will look different for that very reason.
That 1.4 billion is not part of the 1.2 trillion.
Correct.
It's in addition to the 1.4.
Well, so the 1.7 is part of the overall bill. So that was the point I was.
So they're already capturing what we were going to get anyway.
Correct. So, but I'm about on the next slide here. It's going to show you where they have augmented by categories.
Okay. But am I reading?
So it was a 21%. So if you look at the annual increase, it was 21%. So what they're doing is from the FAST Act levels, they've increased it by 21%.
But if we were already getting the 1.4 billion, the previous year we got somewhat similar dollars.
There was about a 2%. There was a 2%.
It's like they erased that and deleted it, and now they're going to
No, they've added on top of it. And so when we go to this next slide,
okay,
the next slide breaks out the various programs.
The commissioner wants to butt in right here.
I'm trying to throw you a lifeline. So the IIJA is one of the components, still a subordinate part of it, was transportation reauthorization of a 5-year transportation bill, which to your point is under FAST Act, the previous transportation bill was a little less than that. So IJA under reauthorization adds to it.
Okay.
So it is sort of 1.2 trillion is not on top of the previous transportation authorization. It includes the base of the FAST Act. And then the next slide will be what we call the plus ups of about how much increase in each of the programs in the current from FAST Act to IIJA. This is complicated, and it's really hard to track it. But think of it as IIJA is the whole pie, and one of the biggest slices is transportation reauthorization.
Okay.
And Josh, it wasn't a typo on water. That's Western Water.
Okay.
Had a carve out, so your slide was good.
So so we have that $300 million number. So that doesn't come as just one lump, spend it as you see fit.
Right.
It's broken down into these categories. So you've got a plus up of 137 million in fiscal year 22 to the National Highway Performance Program. And that's just for projects that are on the national highway system. Then 55 million that's going to surface transportation block grant. Now that can actually go to categories below NHS and local system. There's even a portion of that will go for off-system bridges. Of that 55 million extra, a little over half of it has to be suballocated by population. And those dollars that will go into an MPO area, those are going to be managed by the MPO. So just gives you the sense that there's restrictions on these dollars. It's not just 300 million, even if that at the high end, if it's 300 million. And then about a 19 million increase for safety. And you can see there to the right, so this is a 5-year bill. So you got this big jump from 21 to 22. And then over the remainder of the 5 years, it's about a 2%. Some of them are a little bit more increase, except for railroad highway crossing. They did not increase that at all. It's flat. Congestion mitigation, air quality, that's really focused in our urban area to help reduce pollution and tackle those strategies. 1.6, 1.9 for planning. So this is the one that's a little bit head scratching, but when Federal Highway gave us their breakdown, they actually showed a decrease in the amount between 21 and 22 for the National Highway Freight Program. Hopefully once the bill's signed and how it works out, hopefully it won't be that much of a decrease, but then it pluses from that point about 2% each year. So carbon, the remaining 4 actually new core programs. Carbon reduction is probably you'd probably say similar to the CMAQ program, focused on strategies to reduce their focus on reducing carbon emissions and projects like that. So give us
one example of how you're going to do that in Georgia DOT.
So for instance, under the CMAQ, I don't want to speak for planning, but under CMAQ, so the Georgia commute options was something out of CMAQ that helped promote increased ridership. That's the congestion mitigation air quality program that already exists today.
I think you have a friend again.
Yeah, so carbon reduction will be helps with greenhouse gas emissions, which the highest percentage do come from transportation vehicles. So efficiency, where again, it could be for improved mobility, less congestion, things like that, where you get a benefit of efficiencies out of vehicles. So things like that would be applicable. Josh will get into this. The rules have to be written for these new programs. So we know what's in the law or what's about to become law. So but how that gets operationalized, what it turns into projects, we'll have to see.
If you eliminated a choke point in a certain road between here and say Macon, would that be a reduction of carbon?
It's possible if you can demonstrate an improvement in greenhouse gas emissions.
Did I say Interstate 75 in Henry County?
That was better than the Dahlonega example, probably.
Yeah, I wasn't going to use the Dahlonega. We don't have any carbon.
But also, Commissioner, would that be in like improving buses that we use in transit, things like that?
I think that those are all possibilities. Yeah. If you can, again, demonstrate reduction in greenhouse gases, and some of that express lane transit and things like that we're talking about should fit the bill.
We've invoked another question from.
Yeah, sorry. The planet's biggest greenhouse gas is water vapor. So when you put in electric vehicles that are generated and cooled with water vapor, should they, are we now fighting a war against electric vehicles because they're putting more of the greenhouse gas out there than any other energy that we use? I'm thinking, how crazy is this? Because truly the largest greenhouse gas component is water vapor, and electric generating plants all use water for cooling.
That's another great question. Senator again. Yeah, go ahead.
So the next program now is Protect, and that Protect Formula Grant Program is for improvement of roads and other assets that have been impacted by, recurring weather issues, so flooding, things like that. Think about those type of improvements where you have particularly in the coast and places where you have recurring issues with the weather. So that program would be geared towards improvements of those type assets. The next one is an example of what's talked about in terms of, we talk about formula funding based off of how much you pay, population. This is one of those that was based off of kind of worst to first. So Georgia actually received the least amount possible of any state because it was based off the percentage of your state's bridges which are in poor, fair condition. And because Georgia does, and because this General Assembly, the leadership of the state has made investment in our bridges, we just got the bare minimum because we do take good care of our assets.
We're being punished for doing the right thing.
So, and then the electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which this is going to be a major one, back to the commissioner's point about the rules, is seeing how that's going to be administered. But its aim is installation of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So that will probably require a little bit of time to implement, figure out rules and figure out how to administer.
So not to beat a dead horse here, but I'm really interested in knowing, maybe you can come back to us. If you take out the current allocation that we've gotten historically year to year, how much new money will there be in this 1.2 trillion package that they're advocating as the biggest infrastructure investment in the history of the United States?
I believe what's in the overall bill, they account just not even just transportation, but overall bill. I believe the reference from like CBO and others is there's about 500 of the 1.2, 550 billion of that is bona fide new dollars, not part of an existing authorization. Because not just transportation authorization here, some of the water programs and others, they're in that as well. They've got underlying authorization bills that already had an existing amount of money,
Gotcha.
But they all add up together to be 1.2. But I believe the number that I've seen quoted, and I'll be honest, I have not gone through and tried to count. They say 550 billion is new money.
Okay, thank you.
Of inflation to use it.
I would imagine that would be, they're taking what was of the existing, what was the last year of the authorization that's being reauthorized and comparing it against the level that they've authorized in the first year of the new bill. And so that's where I think they would get the 550.
Thank you, John.
Go ahead, Josh.
So next, just for purposes of having the information, here's the transit allocation for Georgia, about 27.7 increase. So this is statewide. And then we don't have the specific allocations, but I just showed you historically how that money spread, 49% going to urbanized areas, 12% non-urbanized. No, it's not necessarily the focus of this being freight logistics, but just so you had it as a reference.
Let's study that again if you don't mind.
Sorry. So then you can see it's about a 27.7 increase from FY21 to 22 under the IIJA. And then about it varies a little bit from 2.2 to 2.7, 2.1% increase. So each of those, that's formula funding that comes down to those various systems, counties. In the metropolitan area, those funds will flow down through, some of them, a good chunk will go to MARTA, then another chunk of them will be administered through ATL with the county systems. Outside of the urban core, out of the ATL region, GDOT will administer and send the funds to those local systems as subrecipients. So that's just how that would, if you were just kind of estimating, again, we don't have the specific numbers yet,
right,
what Georgia's going to get in each of those categories, but just to give you that context, sort of the full bill context.
Thank you.
So FAA funding, about 15 billion. 3 billion per year for grants for airports and improvements. Discretionary funding, about 5 billion. That'd be $1 billion a year. So some of those competitive discretionary grants that they could go after. So right now, we're waiting for FAA to give us the firm numbers, but our folks estimate about probably a 5 to 25% increase over existing funds that come to the state. Again, that'll be something we'll follow up as we see once now that I imagine it's signed now, but
That's a pretty broad range, 5 to 25%.
so FAA, the way the funding comes down is a little bit different than some of the others. You've got sort of a guaranteed amount for each airport under the AIP program. And then there are other factors that you can seek additional funds. I know some of the airports that have had improvements, they can go and get funding on top of that. So
all of that requires federal compliance, FAA standards.
Correct. And match.
Yeah.
So here's a highlight of kind of the competitive grant programs that are in the bill. And I tried to, there's more than this, but I tried to focus on the ones that would probably be the best candidates in terms of kind of freight programs. So 12.5 billion, this was a very large investment over 5 years, so divide it by 5 for the bridge improvement program for replacing deficient, outdated bridges. 8 billion over 5 years for the nationally significant multimodal freight and highway program, historically known as INFRA. 7.5 again for the local and regional project assistance. That's RAISE. That's usually smaller dollar amount grants. That's an existing grant program today. 5 billion for the National Infrastructure Project Assistance Program. That's got a freight focus on it in the legislation's authorizing language. So that one's probably, any of these you could probably have some freight projects that someone could pursue a grant.
Hey, Josh, thank you. Just for me, I would like to see this slide. It's like instead of the first one, 12.5 billion. I'd like to see that number reflect the Georgia number, because I assume that's the federal.
So these are competitive. So there's no guarantee. So we've transitioned from those formula funds. Apologize for not making it. So we've transitioned from the guarantee funding to now these pots of money in the bill that would have to be, you have to apply for, follow the criteria that's promulgated by USDOT.
Okay.
And then USDOT. So this gets to that piece of, we talked about obviously the increased funding that we're guaranteed needing a match.
Okay.
But this is also for these projects, if you're going to actively pursue them, you have to demonstrate your match. And in some of these programs, we'll actually kind of like the next slide, we'll talk about the CRISI program for rail. They actually give you more points for the more match you have. So if you're able to match more, you might stand a better chance of getting the grant by the way they score it.
Thank you.
So another program that's new is this 2 billion over 5 years for the Rural Surface Transportation Grant Program, 2.5 for EV infrastructure grants, and then 1.4 billion. So I talked about that Protect program. There's also going to be an equivalent competitive grant program to proceed to get funds to improve roadways and other assets that have been impacted by weather and other factors. So there's 12 billion in the bill for intercity passenger rail competitively. And then 5 billion for what I mentioned was CRISI, which is the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure Safety and Improvement Grant. And this has been one that the department has actively pursued in the past. And I'll actually have a slide that hits on some of the successes we've had. Again, this could be a very important program when we talk about the short line rail, leveraging the investments this General Assembly has made in terms of bond funds and state general funds to improve the rail network. This would be a great way to take those funds and leverage, again, more federal funds. 3 billion for rail crossing elimination. I know this commission's been in subsequent commissions have been, previous commissions have been focused on that issue of rail, reducing some of those rail crossings and those issues. So there's another pot of money that exists competitively to be pursued. So 400 million over 5 years for reducing truck emissions at port facilities. I think that kind of wraps up sort of like those big categories, but I did want to highlight, because we've had some successes in Georgia in the freight space on some of these competitive programs. So in 2016, we have 44 million for the Mason Mega Rail Yard, which got, I think the ribbon cutting was just a few days ago. So that received a $44 million nationally significant freight and highway project grant. So a great win there. Recently, we had the 47 million in infra for the Northeast Georgia Inland Port. So again, you've seen some major investments in these federal competitive grant programs for major sort of significant freight infrastructure. And as I mentioned before, here, GDOT in the FY19, we received about 8.6 million, and it helped cover multiple lines. You can see there on the right for the CRISI program. And those obviously have a federal match, have a state match. And so that was utilized from the bond funds that the General Assembly appropriated. And one of the things that probably is a good takeaway is if we know these opportunities, sometimes we don't always know when USDOT is going to put out the notice. And we have had a situation before where the notice occurred kind of in between sessions. And we were in a position as a state where we could not honestly identify to them that we had the match. And we couldn't presume that the General Assembly would give it to us. And so we had to refrain from putting an application. So it's something to think about, is ensuring, okay, in those opportunities, make sure that how do we ensure that the state is in a prime position to seek those funds. So that's just, I just highlight that. As well as, the opportunities that if you have some bond funds uncommitted, that could, usually with the bond funds, you have spelled out particular lines, but potentially a pot that's an amount that's set aside for if there could be a grant opportunity is something to think about. And this is one where they target 50% match. They will allow for less match, but this is one where they score it. They score you better the more match you bring to the table. So I included this slide. I know that we were in the conversation about VMT, and I think it's already been mentioned about this program being in the bill. They've got funding for $50 million over 5 years to look at how that you might implement a per mile user fee. It also creates this advisory board that, just to highlight that they're going to be looking at the different components and making recommendations to the secretary about how to implement this pilot program. And then I guess any subsequent recommendations. So in conclusion, say this at the start, it's with these increases in funds. So motor fuel funded programs. I mean, for us, at the present time, when you go back to those core programs, that 300 million increase, that'll probably be something less. We're probably looking at things, we mentioned House Bill 170. One of the challenges is that, or one of the great things about House Bill 170 was it gave us the opportunity to do some purely state funded projects and set aside funds. So that'll be one issue is as we look at, okay, what are going to be the sources for state matches? Do we reduce, that could be one thing that comes up. Well, do we reduce those funds that go to those state only projects and lose, or how else might we figure out to match these funds? So that's on the motor fuel side. In terms of rail, I mean, that has to be general funds or bond funds. None of the fees and motor fuel are eligible for that. So if we're going to ensure that we can pursue some of these competitive grant programs, understanding, okay, what might that take, or how do we at least strategically plan to have those funds available to pursue the federal funds? How do we make sure that we get the state match in place? And I think that wraps it up.
Josh, thank you for this. It's very thorough. Couple questions and comments to you. Maybe this is a question for the commissioner as well. When do you think you'll have your priority list put together for this match money or for the grant programs? Do you have a timeline in mind on that? Or?
Let's see, the president signed it at about 15 minutes ago, right. So we're not quite there.
Not there yet.
The easy answer is on the plus up programs, we'll have something pretty quick, probably before you get back into regular session around the first of the year. To the extent we know what that is. The other programs, the newly added programs, we'll have to go through a process where USDOT and then the modal agencies, Federal Highway, probably more specifically toward us, will have to develop rules and regs of what the rules of engagement are to how to operationalize that. I did have the opportunity to meet with the acting administrator of Federal Highway a few weeks ago. IJA was passed by the Senate in August, and it really hasn't changed at all, if any, since then. So USDOT Federal Highways already have been working on sort of what those are, but until it's signed, it's not a bill, it's not a law. So now it's signed. So we'll have to be responsive to how that comes out. So it's sort of hard for me to answer when that happens. The discretionary programs that are existing were plussed up. So that will be calls for projects whenever the timeline USDOT puts those out. Same thing for the new discretionary programs, though. They'll have to go through a rulemaking process, notice of public rulemaking, public comment, get comments back, operationalize it, put it out, get submittals, review them, and then make awards. I will tell you that this is a big lift for USDOT. I saw the undersecretary make a statement that, they've got to hire people to get people in because the amount of discretionary program it's in IJA is huge. It's a big lift for them. And it's just, as we've seen in Georgia, even is when you put a call out for projects, you get lots of requests. And so they've got to operationalize that. I know they're laser focused on it and trying to get it out, but it's going to take some time. And the challenge of all that is the first year. This is unprecedented. I actually had opportunity to talk to two former USDOT secretaries and going all the way back into the late 80s, early 90s, saying, have you ever seen such a sea-level change in funding in the first year? In the past, there was usually a little bit of ramp up of increased dollars over years. The biggest increase happens in this first budget year, and we're now a month into the federal, or 2 months into the month and a half in the federal fiscal year. So by September of next year, these dollars in this first year have to be federally authorized, checking a box to say that you can move forward. So there's a lot of work to be done over this really less than a year now. So that's a long answer to your question. Plus ups existing programs, pretty easy. We'll have to shuffle the deck a little bit on projects. There'll probably be a lot more preliminary engineering starts because now we know there's more money in those categories. So we'll have to start design to get those projects through the mill. But the other programs will have to be responsive to whenever we get the guidance that comes out from USDOT.
So speaking of freight and logistics, are there some projects that we can sort of grab hold of some of this money for to try to fast track some of the improvements that we've identified over the last couple of years through this task force? And do we need to earmark some money in our budget, Mr. Majority Leader, in our upcoming session to where you'll be ready to go after that funding? Because it will have to be spent fairly or authorized fairly quickly. Have you thought of an opportunity like that?
I really like your question.
All right.
And we will continue to think along those lines. And yes, and we've had some of those thoughts. Some of the easier wins to advance quickly are interstate rehabilitation, Mr. Poole talked about, or interstate expansion opportunities that this state desperately needs. And those are sort of the no-brainers that you can get to pretty quickly to access money, to move it pretty quickly. And so those are kind of the opportunities we'll continue to talk to this commission about, and the House and Senate Transportation Committees as well.
Truck parking expansions, or would that something like that qualify?
It would under some of the programs, and then that's something we actively are working on as well.
Good. Awesome.
Good report. Well, thank you. Just my question, early on, or a month or two ago, there's some talk about priority setting. Were they going to accept the work you guys have done for years on what's the most important thing to do next? Is that still in play, or you feel that there'll be an interjection of, I hate to say the word, politics into this, or will it stay with what we've done that y'all have worked so hard on?
No, the states still through IJ still have, guide and direct through our planning processes that exist, and through our freight and logistics plan and the updated freight logistics plan. States still have a lot of autonomy in that. There is a provision in IJ to enhance and help states with their freight and logistics plans.
There's a pilot program on prioritization.
Yeah, there's a pilot project in there and that may be something we want to engage in as well. Again, we've got to see how they set the rules out. Of sometimes the juice may not be worth the squeeze. We have to look at that. But I'm obviously biased and think very highly of our freight and logistics plan we have and where we're going with this next one. Us in Texas were the first to be federally compliant and to move ahead. But those still will help guide and direct. Now, when you get in the discretionary programs, you're competing against everybody, and every project stands on its own, and it goes through a process. And so we'll just have to see how we compete. But to Josh's point, to compete for those programs, you've got to have dollars to put with your project to match or over, really what we'd call overmatch the normal 80-20%. Because if it's already 80-20, then why do you need any grant money? You got to show that you've got money, but you need more federal money.
If I can supplement, just I went back to the slide. So those bottom 4 programs are the new ones. Those are the ones back to the commissioner's comments. We'll have to look and see what are the regs. How what is it going to take to administer these? All the other ones are existing programs. And for the most part, now remember, this bill is the core policy of this bill was the Senate transportation bill that passed out unanimously in the Senate. They actually, on all of those, rather than restricting them or putting more, they actually expanded in some instances the state's flexibility in how they use them. So like the safety improvement program, they actually opened that up to where in the last authorization, they kind of restricted it. They kind of brought it back so that we can focus also on educational things. So I would say, to your point, Mr. Chairman, on the core formula funding, we've actually got a little bit more flexibility than we had before on those core programs because they added sort of additional uses.
All right, last question goes to Representative Perkle.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you went through these numbers, I was just kind of awestruck. I was the funding with the M or with the B rather than the M, billions versus millions. And one of the things, as Chairman just mentioned, we need to make sure that our focus is on the next thing. That is the next thing and not the stretch thing, the thing that continues to make Georgia. I don't know, you've heard it 600,000 times, but continues to make Georgia the place that we want to raise our kids, that we want to build our businesses in, that people will come here because of what we're doing. When politics gets injected, sometimes, you think of the bridge to nowhere, it was a construction project that linked no communities. And so we need to make sure that we have our focus on the next thing that is really the next thing to make us better. So thank you.
Thank you. Josh, thank you for your
Chairman.
Always good guy to have up here with good details. Appreciate it. Our next and last speaker today will be Fred Miller, who's on our Zoom call today. We're discussing freight rail perspectives on supply chains. Mr. Miller, can you hear us?
I sure can. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Great. Well, good afternoon, Chairman Gooch and Chairman Jaspers and the rest of the members of the commission. I'm Fred Miller, and I serve at the Association of American Railroads as an Assistant General Counsel and Government Affairs Liaison. On behalf of the members of AAR, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. Our members include not only the 7 major Class 1 railroads, but we also have some short lines, commuters, and Amtrak. But today I understand we're going to be talking about the freights and primarily the Class 1 freights and kind of our perspectives on the supply chain and the disruptions we've seen. We actually, represent all the major 7 Class 1s who hold all the majority of freight railroad mileage, employees, revenue, and traffic throughout the country. And also our counterparts in Mexico and Canada as well. So it's really an integrated continental network that spans across the country. And it's quite frankly, America's railroads are some of the world's best. So freight supply chains, as you all know best, are very complex systems, and they're driven by the global and domestic stakeholders that isn't always necessarily within the control of just one actor like the railroads. We're doing our part, however, to ensure that there's the free flowing commerce and to maintain the fluidity of our networks and ensure that there's sufficient capacity to deliver the goods on which we all depend. Our role as the railroads in the supply chain is kind of, if I can leave you with one good point, we're 24/7 critical links as the middle movers between both the ports and then the rail terminal, and ultimately getting the product from the rail terminal out to its final destination. So when you're moving a container from, say, a manufacturer in Asia to the eastern United States, you have a couple options. You can come to the west and offload at a western port, and then bring it from the port to the terminal by rail, or you can take it around, circumvent, and go to the east, as you all know well, and move it by rail from that eastern port to its destination, where it's going to get distributed as well. As you know, when we begin our movement and our touch, when the freight or the container comes into the country, and a lot of times it's loading the container onto the rail car at the port, on dock loading, which is extremely efficient. Sometimes it's loading the container onto a rail car at an intermodal rail facility, where it has to move by a truck chassis for a short distance to get there. That's called drayage. And sometimes it's loading a container onto a rail car, taking it to an intermodal facility after the container itself has been unloaded and put into one of the larger domestic containers, those 53 footers that we all see. And then it's actually moved it can be put on a rail car as well and moved across the country. So what have we seen as global supply chains and the disruptions? It's really been unprecedented over the last 18 months. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the global manufacturing and caused fluctuations in that, but also in consumer consumption and spending patterns. And the facts really back it up from our perspective. As the outset of the pandemic in March and April of 2020, consumer spending plummeted and retailers' inventories rose. There was a lot of excess capacity there. But soon thereafter, when the economy started recovering, consumer spending really shifted significantly. And all that money that folks were spending on the service sector industries, such as travel, restaurants, and the like, was actually being shifted to the goods. And that's where we come into play. So we saw by June 2020, consumer spending on actual goods, not services, was higher than January 2020 and continued trending higher throughout the year. Fewer firms saw these spending patterns and these shifts coming, and even fewer were prepared for it. But retailers did try. They were unable to catch up. And in fact, by spring of 2021, inventories had fallen to record lows, meaning that that's where they actually remain today. And there's not much in storage in terms of inventories. Similarly, rail intermodal volumes, that's container on flat car or trailers on flat car, had initially fallen 12 to 17% in March and May of 2020, but and were expected to remain low. However, intermodal volumes shot up in the summer of 2021, surpassing 2019 levels by August and breaking the all-time monthly record in November 2020. That record was then again broken in January of 21 and April of 21. So in many weeks of the end of 2020 through the first half of 2021, U.S. railroads were handling close to 300,000 containers and trailers. Those are levels that no one expected. Intermodal volumes in the first 6 months of 2020 was far higher than ever recorded before. And we saw year over year increases in intermodal traffic for about 12 months. To handle these increased volumes and avoid bottlenecks, all stakeholders have to do their part to maintain this safe and efficient flow, and certainly railroads did. We saw a lot of different challenges that, as you all know, with our rail customers and other supply chain participants, some of which are the labor shortages that you see at ports or trucking firms, even the warehouses and manufacturers and retailers themselves. There was a shortage of drayage and long haul truck capacity and chassis and the warehouse space and workers to put them in. And then we also saw other events that you really couldn't have predicted. In addition to the pandemic challenges, was pre-existing trade disputes with other nations and extreme weather events such as the wildfires, the hurricanes, and severe flooding and storms. There was also the near week-long blockage of the Suez Canal in March of 2021. So all these impacts hit the railroads too. And for us, probably the biggest supply chain problem was just sort of the inability of many of our customers to effectively process the flow of traffic, especially intermodal containers into and out of rail terminals. So, when something gets to the rail terminal, the container arrives and you need a destination for it. So you need the driver, the truck, and the chassis to be available. And then you need the warehouse and the receiver facility to have not only the workers, but the space available as well. And right now we're seeing space, in the Southern California area in warehouses dip below 1%, which is just unheard of. And then you're seeing, maybe 3%, 2 to 3% on average in other areas like Chicago, which is really, that means there's not much space available to move things. It's a real significant problem because rail intermodal terminals are focused on throughput, not long-term storage. Obviously, we're in the business of moving goods, not storing them. So while there is some flex in the systems and we can absorb, limited spikes, this is, when there's big imbalances, that becomes unsustainable. And really, we like to say that at the time, in-gates, the number of goods coming in were exceeding outgates. So congestion was ensuing. So the goods weren't leaving. And then what does that mean? Well, for us, that meant that sometimes mainline traffic would back up, having impacts on other customers. And also it impacts the fact that the availability of containers and supply and chassis within the supply chain coming imbalanced because they can't be moved to high demand areas because they're being stored or sitting in yards or other areas. So what efforts have railroads taken to try and address these challenges? Well, we've worked diligently with all of our supply chain partners and to remain as fluid as possible. And we want to be and are available to meet present and future demand. First, some of the things that we've done is we'll obviously continue to operate 24/7. It's something we welcome throughout the rest of the supply chain as well. And I know there were some announcements about that at some of the ports and in other areas and in some warehouses as well to move to that, because then that kind of creates some immediate capacity within the supply chain when you can bring things in on hours that you otherwise, or take things out on hours that you otherwise might not. And we really appreciate those efforts being taken by some of our partners. Second, we're actually partnering with a lot of our customers to find ways to create more fluidity within our network and theirs as well. We're increasing the coordination between railroads to manage the flow of traffic with our trucking partners and take shipments as soon as possible when warehouse capacity is available. Some of our members are offering incentives, financial incentives to customers for coming in on off hours and to pick up boxes, or and even to, an incentive to when you bring in a full box to take an empty, or bring in an empty when you take a full box out. So making it a dual move. We're also rerouting traffic away from the busier terminals to less crowded terminals. There was a recent report with one of our Western railroads who is moving product away from instead of taking it to inland areas in Southern California where warehouses were very full, they decided let's move it up to some space in Utah, and then we can distribute it from Utah where there was the availability in the warehouses, the trucking and chassis and the like to distribute it throughout the West. They're also making sure that, we increase the available storage capacity and staging areas within our own yards and terminals, stacking boxes higher, taking and moving things into tighter rows so you can fit more where needed. And then creating additional railroad to railroad interchanges. Sometimes that can be really helpful because then it's not, you're bringing it in, the product or the boxes into one yard, having to cross town truck it to another yard, and then put it on the train. Finding areas where you can actually do what we call a steel wheel interchange, where you just hand it off from one railroad to another. And that alleviates that pressure on our friends in the trucking business. And also just mounting chassis where we can, mounting the containers onto chassis when they're brought in, and just whatever chassis it is, it doesn't matter. We'll put it on there. And that certainly reduces the dead miles for truckers in the work that they're doing. At the AAR, we publicly are doing some we release daily or weekly aggregated data to ensure that on different types of commodities and intermodal volumes, so that everybody within the supply chain knows what we're seeing and expecting and can plan accordingly. Freight railroads are also, as you all well know, investing and have over $740 billion in private funding since 1980. In recent years, that's been about $25 billion a year, and we expect that to be about the same this year. And that, again, is the private investment that helps ensure we have that capacity, we have the lines, we can to move the products we need. But finally, we really appreciate and respect all the skill and professionalism of our employees, because they're steadfastly working to address these challenges and help keep us and the economy moving. We're confident we have the assets we need to continue to do so, and we will continue to evaluate those needs and to meet the challenges and adjust our levels as needed, depending on what we're seeing out there in the world. So, just returning the network to the fluidity that we can, and will take time. It's also going to take that partnership I mentioned with all of our supply chain partners. But the railroads are committed and willing to do that, and we will work closely with the customers and all of our other policymakers and partners in the supply chain to do that. And we want to help find as many creative solutions as we can to solve these challenges before us. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I understand questions are the best way to learn, so I'm happy to answer any you might have.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Miller. We appreciate your time being with us today. I have one quick question. Is there anything that Georgia can do from a public policy point of view to help the Class I railroads here in Georgia? And then my next question would be, which states do you think are doing the most for that relationship with their Class I railroads?
So yes, thank you very much. And I know I was on a little earlier when you all were talking about the IIJA, and I think that's important that's getting signed into law. There's a lot of, as the gentleman before me, Mr. Waller, was talking about, a lot of money there for public sector partners to invest into the public sector side of these freight rail improvement projects, be it with, at ports. There's a special port program as well in that bill, not in addition to the Chrissy program and the like. So I think that money is going to be really helpful in to match and partner for the public sector to partner with the railroads in achieving better fluidity, be it more on dock. I think that's one of the projects you're working on with the port of GA ports, is working on that on dock rail capabilities, which again can really increase fluidity. That's really helpful. And I think implementing that law, getting that money out, and is going to be really helpful. And that's a partnership between the feds and states. For us, there's, some of the best things that states can do is sometimes refrain from doing. Not that Georgia has this problem, but some of the states we see are introducing sort of complexities into the system with mandating two-man crews and the like on trains, which actually could hurt fluidity and productivity going forward. That's not a problem in Georgia, so it's been a good one in there, but in other states we have seen that problem. But I think especially with a state like Georgia, where you focus on your ports, you're really helping to improve that fluidity is extremely helpful. So that can always be good for us.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions? I believe you have answered everyone's concerns, but thank you so much for being with us and being a part of this progress that we're making here in our state.
Well, certainly I very much appreciate it, sir. And, feel free to reach out if you all need anything or think of questions afterward.
Okay. Have a good day.
You too.
Looks like we have come to the end of our agenda right at 4 o'clock, which is not a bad place to stop. Chairman Jaspers, would you like to say anything before we adjourn?
I just sitting here thinking, just as all of us are, there's a lot of opportunities coming our way. I'm glad that y'all worked on it 7 years ago with 170 money, I think, and then doing what we're doing today will put us in position to take advantage of some of what Josh talked about. Good.
Anyone else? Any other final comments? All right. Well, thank you all again. We will see you at our next meeting in the near future. Thanks for coming out.